Look, it's fantastic to be here. It's nearly precisely 1 year since I sold the yield to Yamaha Ag. And so being invited to come back, I've spent a lot of time in the Valley, it's sort of like a really good time because I'm sort of got enough nearness to it, if you like, 1 year that I hope I'm still current. Technology moves very fast. But on the other side of the coin, it gives me enough distance to have perspective. And so what I really am hoping to share with you all today is, I suppose, some of the journey of the things that I've actually learned along the way and what I think is coming for the industry and what we can do to be better prepared. In fact, watching Caleb's introduction was hilarious because I just wanted to show you what I was going to talk about, and I did not generate this from ChatGPT or AI, all out of my human brain. And it was kind of weird because it was almost exactly the same questions, right? What is it? I just want to spend a bit of time on what is AI and trying to distill it into an explanation that is easy for people to understand. Apologies to the technologists in the room who may find this frustrating, but I think a lot of it is very mystified, and I'm going to make an attempt, and you can grade me at the end about how good I am at explaining this. And then I want to ask the question, are we ready as an industry? And if we aren't ready, why? And what are we going to do to get ready? And what are growers already doing today? And just want to call out and thank all the folks when we get to the case studies who took the time to do a little phone interview with me so I could put together just different case studies of different companies. So, obviously coming from the background that I do, 10 years in the yield, obviously I'm very influenced by that because that's what I'm drawing from my experience. But I've tried to actually generalise it up beyond just the yield. And then finally, what can we do as growers and as an industry to get ready and to accelerate this? So the yield, we've already talked about that a little bit. I founded the company in 2014 in Tasmania. And I just want to say, I got given as a gift beautiful boots. See these? Blundstone boots from Tasmania. Had to come all the way to Napa. And I understand Blundstone is a sponsor of the conference today and of the association. And so that was kind of very funny. So I had to wear those today. So Tasmania, as you know, cool climate wine growing region. So been working with the wine industry since 2014, were some of our first customers. And we actually started working with AI. When I started the yield, it was actually a hardware company, and we were doing microclimate sensing, and we were actually building beautiful microclimate sensors. And built with Bosch, who was an investor in the business, so German technology, wonderful things, worked a treat. Anyway, what we were doing is in the oyster industry in Tasmania, we were working with growers and we were measuring salinity. So when it rains, you get runoff from the land. What happens is that the health regulator shuts it down because oysters are filter animals, and when you get runoff, you actually get contaminants, make them dangerous to eat, can actually kill you. And so we were using salinity sensors in the water to actually test, to measure when the salinity went down meant there was more runoff. And every catchment had a cut-off point where they'd have to start harvesting. And back in 2014, the growers said, this is fabulous. We can get, the shutting and closing is done so much more efficiently than doing this manual testing, taking to the lab, waiting days, before they could reopen. They said, but, do you think that you could potentially kind of tell us when it was going to happen? Because if we could get it out of the water, the crop out of the water before we were shut down, they last sort of 2 weeks in a cool room before they're shucked, that would be absolutely fabulous because it would really mean a lot for our businesses. So we thought, how hard could that be? So I had a young woman working for me at the time from South Africa, actually, immigrated to Australia. She was all of 26, and she said, you know what? I reckon I could do that with deep learning. I said, deep what? She said, deep learning. I said, okay, let's give it a whirl. So within 12 weeks, she built the first proof of concept where we were able to predict with a high degree of accuracy, salinity, and when it was going to hit these cut-off points. And we were using weather, gridded weather, and we were using this salinity point data, and we were combining it together into a deep learning model, and we were predicting salinity and telling the industry. And they were getting crop out of the water before they got shot. Tick, tick, tick. Fabulous. We then went on to apply that into agriculture, same sort of thing, And we actually patented that technology. So the yield now, Yamaha Ag, holds the global patent granted, including here in the US, of using AI to predict weather in agriculture, and does it very well. And we've been doing that in production as a system that we sell and incorporate into our software since about 2016. So a long time. The reason I tell you that story, there's plenty of other things I could tell you along the way about the journey for that, is that we've been doing this for a long time at scale and doing it commercially, and that's difficult to do. And I've learned a lot about not only the technology, but also how to actually explain it and the challenges of selling it to people, which I can tell you is significant. So what is AI? So I just wanted to talk about what is AI, and let's just get some basic sort of agreed sort of concepts around this. So you can break, AI is, when you boil it all down, that first sort of definition there, it's really a computer system that mimics human intelligence, okay? So that's really what you're talking about, a machine that kind of can do what you can do, just a little bit like we saw in the Prezzo this morning with Caleb. Caleb is how it actually generated that speech, and you think, gosh, could a human have done that? Well, that's essentially what AI does. But there's a series of kind of subsets of AI, if you like. One of them is machine learning, which is really particularly good at mathematics and models. We'll come back to that. Deep learning is the example that I explained, neural nets, which we use to predict salinity. And then you have generative AI, which is producing new content. Now, ChatGPT is an example of that little inner circle. That is the one that's getting enormous kind of, is responsible for the hype in a way about AI. Because it's the thing that humans can interact with and is the most intuitive, doing the things that we kind of understand. Three biggest uses of ChatGPT is consulting industry and writing emails, students writing assignments, CEOs writing speeches, and actually, interestingly, coders, software coders, who are using it because, you know, coding is actually a language. Python and all these different things that you code in is actually a language. So they're the three biggest users of it, and they're things that are very close to human experience, easy to kind of understand. So the thing about ChatGPT as well, which is kind of important to understand, is that, and this, we're going to talk about how you create models, but you need data. You need lots and lots and lots of data. And so we're talking about, in the case of ChatGPT, 1 billion pages of text, every single thing that's ever written, everything on the internet, every Wikipedia, everything. Every time you upload something, including, I'm sorry, I didn't catch the gentleman's name, he's uploading into ChatGPT. All of that data and information is going into this training data that is used to train these models. And you know there's many competing models that are coming around. So it is very, very good at language and of doing this sort of interpretation, if you like. And it's like a very sophisticated search. I'm sure everyone's actually used it. It's not as great at math, actually, but it is very good at delivering language. The other thing is it's very expensive to run. It costs just such a huge amount of energy and cost to run these models, which it's got its own economic consequences. I'm not going to go into that today. But the key message to take away from here, you need a lot of data to actually train models. The biggest limitation on ChatGPT will be its cost and will be the amount of data. They're already saying they're running out of data. They're also almost like making up data to feed back into the models. So how does all of this work? Let's cut to the kind of the basics of this. So this is a very stylised sort of model about, diagram about how we actually create AI models. Now, I know you're all looking at it, and I really should have put up a blank screen, because I want you for a moment to actually think about what humans do. And let's use an example from the industry. Let's say that you're a new kind of, coming into the industry, you've just got out of Davis, you've probably done your Viti course, and you got your first job in a vineyard. What are you going to do? First of all, what you're going to do is you're going to learn. So downy mildew, okay, I've read about it in a textbook. I know it's look on the upper side of the leaf, it looks like kind of these yellow blobs that are kind of a bit kind of sharp edges. Okay, you're going to walk around and you're going to see it. And you're going to go, right, okay, I got that. That's what downy mildew looks like. Then what I have to learn to do is I'm probably going to not get it right the first year, pick it too late, not see it in the right place. Okay, I'm going to talk to my neighbour. They're going to tell me, okay, well, we actually in these weather conditions, we had a bit of rain, humidity's up, temperature's right. Okay, and our neighbour's got it, so it's probably spores in the air. Rightio, I got that. I've got a mental model in my mind that I have learned. Putting all these things together, that's what downy mildew looks like. I do this. I run an experiment, which every grower does. I get it right in, didn't get quite the application right, didn't get the right chem mix. Okay, next year I'm going to adjust. You are actually inferring and learning. And you are going through that loop, that outside loop of you creating a model. And once probably, I don't know, what do you reckon it takes to be a good vineyard manager? 5 years? If you've been trained, you've got someone with you, you've actually got to know the vineyard. I know some of you in the room will say never, 30 years, but okay, let's say 5 years. Every other single year is a training year. See that inside loop? You're actually doing it again and again and again and again. And you're training your model in your head again and again. And see that thing called feature sets? That's probably all those Davis models. Little mini models that they've developed of when do I predict downy? I know if these certain weather variables happen, and I've got this is when I'm going to get it. That's like what we'd call a feature set. It's like a little mini model that someone's created. That is remember I said AI is mimicking human behaviour? That is what we're doing with machines. So effectively what happens, now flip your lens, so you've got that, everyone got that concept? You basically got the training loop is what you do every single year in your learning, and the outside one is the model that you've built. What you're doing with AI is exactly the same, except you're doing it with computers. And it's called inference. You've got inputs and you've got outputs. To predict anything with AI, you must already know the outcome you're trying to get, i.e. what you're trying to grow. You're trying to grow that perfect crop at a certain sort of tonnage per acre. That's what you're trying to do. So what a computer is doing, which is very different to the way small data kind of deductive logic is done by universities traditionally when we didn't have access to big data, is effectively you're inferring. You're saying this outcome with these set of experiences, you're throwing compute at it, you're putting it all into a computer and it's learning the patterns between it. Now the humans, see that little human down the right-hand side there, what they're doing is they're accessing a class of models, and these are models that you can find on the internet, and they're putting it together. So, AI is half science, half art. And what they're doing is they're then finding the best model, they're testing it to see which is the best predictor. See that little feature set? They're learning as well. And they've got the same little mini models that, my new grower has actually got. So they've gone and looked in the academic literature and found out, for example, that this is the downy mildew model. They can create a little mini model that sits in that feature set, that gets fed in, plus what's happening in the weather, plus what's happening in the crop variety, the region, the satellite data, the outcome. And it is throwing compute at it and learning it. That is all AI is. And then the training loop is every season, or you can train every day, you can train once a week, you can train once a year, whatever you like. It depends a little bit on what you're trying to solve. The computer is mimicking you and it's learning. And it's looking at the difference, like you do. Every single year you do an experiment, it's learning the difference between what it expected and what happened, and it's feeding it back in. And it's learning again. And it's changing the model. It is not an Excel formula. I cannot tell you how many times I've said that in sales. It is not an Excel formula. Every time you run an AI model, it's a different model. It's actually like an army of math robots that are using this system of learning, and it's every time you run it in production, we might do 100 different predictions and then do a distribution curve, take the mean and tell you the min-max. It is not an Excel formula. And so it's really important to understand that because, I can't tell you how many customers said to me, can I own that model? I said, sure, you can own the model if you want to also own the platform and rebuild it and rebuild the data sets and the feature sets and everything else, because it does not exist in abstraction from that. It's actually embedded in the system. So does that help? I know it's a bit of a dive, but it's actually important because when we talk about what are we going to do next, you can imagine what you've got to do when you start looking at technology and actually applying it in the real world is you've got to break down all these different steps and work out how you then put it together in a logical way to get to a point where you can achieve the dream. So what is the dream? The dream is that we use AI in agriculture in a whole lot of different ways. Yield prediction, for example. You know, we already do this. How do you actually use AI to predict? Crop health management, visual analytics, you know, my downy mildew example. Recognise, first of all, get the machine to actually recognise that it's got a problem, step one. Step two, teach the next one down an automated tractor to recognise it, right? That autonomous machine has to actually be able to learn to drive around like any person. If you were recruiting, you've got to teach it how to go up and down those rows, turn around, what's the shape of it, watch out for the humans, you know, don't run over the equipment, you know, and everything's moving. You've got to teach it all of that and break it down. And every one of those is a model that you've got to create. Climate, obviously, unlike a factory, I don't know if anyone's been into a car factory, you see those robots going, guess what, they're really dumb. They're not actually smart. They're actually doing one job which you can program to because nothing's changing. All they have to do is go, the only thing they have to know is if a human comes within their range to stop, and so they can be reset. In our industry, we're dealing with living plants outside in weather and everything's changing all of the time. So it's the perfect industry for AI, you know, but it's also hard. It's also hard because of that. And then, so you've got climate, you've got supply chain optimisation all along the supply chain. So you're not only using it on the farm, but you're also using it in the winery, in sales, in marketing, in production. All of these different ways along the supply chain, data is valuable up and down. And all of this data, which is the fuel of AI, can be used to create models. So it's really important. So this technology exists, right? There's nothing new about this in a way. Well, it is. It's very new. But if you think about all of the industries that are using AI, we've already got autonomous. I mean, you can get an autonomous vehicle down in San Francisco, in Wayo, off you go, right? It already exists. We already use AI and algorithmic trading in finance. We already use AI in weather prediction. We already use AI in medical science, in detection of cells. All of this technology is there. So the dream is very real that we can get to a point where all of this is integrated, where the tractor's going up and down, it's reading what it's seeing, it's logging what it's doing, it's feeding it into algorithms, it's predicting, and you're actually creating this beautiful thing of a closed system. And you've got humans, the incredibly talented humans, supervising it all, freed from all that craziness of what, you know, trying to wake up at 5 o'clock and work out what the weather is and can I spray, freed from all of that and actually thinking about how high-value problems of how to create the perfect vintage, you know. That's the dream. And all of the technology exists there. The trick, the very real trick is how do we get there? How do we break it down in a way that we can get there? And the key to this is asking these questions in the top right-hand corner. How do we reduce cost? How do we reduce risk? How do we increase value? Because if you can't do those three things, you, as the industry, as growers, are never going to pay for it. So we're kind of like in this weird spot in a way where we have to work out the pathway of how do we put together the different pieces in a way that is going to create value as we go so that it's worth investing in, but we're on a road to actually reach that dream of being, you know, really being able to use intelligent systems to help us grow the perfect grape. So are we ready? I really like this picture. You know, I assume you do this, you know, hide and seek. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, coming ready or not? Yeah? Okay. Well, this is the first question. Are we ready? Please tell me you do that in America. Yeah, okay, good. I know sometimes cultural references don't travel. So back in the Yield Today, we actually did a survey of 900 agricultural growers in asking them the question, and this is actually now about 2 or 3 years old, so it's not super current. But as you can see there, more than 80%, even 2-3 years ago, and this was before the ChatGPT hype really took off, agree that using real-time data and AI can improve yield outcomes at a lower cost per unit. That's pretty impressive. 80% of you think that this is already the case. And there is near universal agreement, right? 98.7, you might as well be 100%, that advanced data analytics is important to the future of agriculture. And, we've got a lot of folks in the room in the middle of the season who are very busy people. Obviously, there is a lot of interest and a lot of belief that we can do this. But this is the reality, right? We've got, oh gosh, this is really testing my eyesight from this distance. But anyway, the reality is that we've probably got about 15% of people using, in the industry, in US, in viticulture, using aerial sort of scanning or drones to actually, monitor their crop. We've got about 3% who are actually using robotics in the field. And we have about, is that 9%? I hope I'm right. Using kind of sensors in the field to do weather, like to pick up what's happening in the environment to help them with things like modelling. So we're a long way away from people's aspirations. Just to give you a benchmark of the comparators, if you look at industries that are very data intensive, so in that sense they're more digitally ready, you're probably about 20 to 30%. So finance, marketing, IT, much higher. Actually, consulting's really getting up there for precisely the reasons that we just saw, that you can really quickly, get sort of break problems down and conceptually create, ways of actually working with a client to help define a problem and resolve it. So we're a long way. Just before we go on, does this feel right to you? Put up your hands. How many of you have actually got, and I'm going to test you on this. I don't mean a proof of concept, you're trying it. I mean, if you took it away, it would really cause you a problem. How many in the room are using aerial spray? Aerial droning, coverage. Okay, I will interpret back to the room, I'd say probably less than 10%. How many of you are actually using operationally robotics? Genuinely not doing trials? We've got one. And how many of you using sensors, using AI with sensors? Yep, a few more of those. Still probably good to know you almost exactly align with this survey. So we've just done our own little learning and validation. So we've got a way to go to meet the dream that all of us believe in. How are we actually going to get there? So the first thing I want to say to you is it's coming already or not. So it's not a question of if, it's a question of when. And I suppose my challenge to you and to us as an industry is how do we control our own destiny and make sure we get the best outcomes from all of this? Because I'm sure you've all read as well, not only is AI fabulous, it's kind of a little scary too. And so how do we make sure that we shape this technology? Technology is not neutral, you get to shape it. You get to work out how you're actually going to use it. How do we actually do that in a way that's good for industry, that's good for our businesses, that's good for the environment, that's good for our community? And that's the challenge that we have. It's not if, it's when, and it's how. So how do we get ready? One of the first things we really have to understand, and that's why I talked about this at the beginning, remember that inferring, that learning, that's all about data. To actually be able to make use of any form of AI, you have to have data. And the example that we heard about putting the data into ChatGPT to interpret it, the data has to exist in the first place, otherwise you can't do that, right? So the biggest challenge is, and I think the easy thing, well, the first thing, maybe not easy, is to actually get your own data sorted out so that you're AI ready, right? And this is not a trivial thing, it turns out. The first thing that you have to make sure that you have data in our industry, because we're talking about place and weather, is you've got to stitch it together in time and place, right? So every piece of data has to have a location, it has to have a time. Because if you can't overlay weather, which is time-based by definition, you can't actually look at what is one of the biggest drivers in our industry is the weather, is the plant and the weather. Then you've got to make sure that your data is clean, and that it's complete, that it's valid, that it's consistent. I cannot tell you how many different acronyms there are for CAB-SAV. You have You know, CAB, you have CAS, you have CS. You know, every time you name it something differently, it doesn't look the same to a computer, right? Dumb stuff like that. Well, it's not dumb, but it's things like that that didn't matter probably at the time you did it, but matter a hell of a lot now in an AI world. I'm not going to go through all of this because we don't have time, but the other is an evaluation about how ready it is. Have you got enough? Typically, you know, like learning, you've got to learn. 7 years, you want 7 years, you want to learn. You've got to have, also it's got to be complete, you can't have gaps, you know, it's got to be really ready. So there's a process for doing this. And so in the yield, we developed the methodology. So this spider graph, what we could do is take a data set from a customer, run it through this, map it against this sort of spider graph, and then work out a digital readiness. And so you can see this scale of digital readiness right down on the left-hand side where everything's in the centre. It's not very complete. You've got a lot of work to do. Once you start filling it out, it's rarely that it's, by the way, consistent like this. It usually looks like a jagged line that you can get mathematical models. And when you get it really complete, you can actually get to an advanced ML model. So it's really very important. So then, effectively, what we did, and this is an experiment, I hope Jacob's here. Where's Jacob? Oh, there he is. We did this together with the yield and with AgCode. It was done on a confidential basis. Data was destroyed after we did the experiment. So I just want to reassure everyone it was all done very at the highest level of ethics of data control. And effectively what we did is we took the data that was in AgCode and we ran it through that process, and this is a summary of it. So on the left-hand side, you can see all those things on the left were basically, every blob is the number of acres. All that on the left means that they effectively, their level of digital readiness, you know, so it had gaps, it wasn't consistent. And then on the vertical axis is whether it had its boundaries, how many boundaries it actually, whether it had its boundaries, what percentage of the boundaries of the blocks were actually in. And then you can see that what we did is you can see it there mapped up. In the top right-hand corner, there's one, but the rest of it was very scattered. Now, can I just add, the problem is not AgCode. AgCode runs a beautiful set of software. The issue was people didn't enter it, because humans enter data and they didn't enter it completely. And they were, you know, sometimes they were keeping boundaries in another data software, you know, their spray software or whatever. And so they weren't integrated into one place. So we went from the hundreds of AgCode customers in wine down to 50 that we could do this with, down to sub 10 that we could actually produce a model for. That just gives you a sense of the level of readiness in the industry. And that's what it came out with. This is yield prediction. So at fruit set, using AI, predicting yield, left-hand side is the benchmark from what growers were entering in AgCode of their estimates. Right-hand side is what the yield was able to do with an AI model at different geographical scales. So you can see that we went from estate to region to variety down to block. It was, once the data in those subset was universally better than what the growers could do themselves, universally better. And partly because it was entering all the weather data into there, so that these are built off, you know, long-term forecasts as well as short-term forecasts, and so you were really getting that all picked up. Many of the growers, they were at the block level, you might as well flip a coin. And can I just say that in this comparison, we know that the model was run at fruit set. The one on the left-hand side, we don't know when it was run. It could have been done the day before harvest. And Caleb was telling me yesterday that it's not unknown for people to do the harvest, then put it in because they've got incentives for getting their estimates right. So, you know, who knows what really is going on there. But the gap is very meaningfully, statistically meaningfully and commercially meaningfully significant difference. So first step is you need to get your data sorted out, because any AI that you're going to use, even if you're using ChatGPT in the way that we heard about this morning, you've got to have your data sorted out to actually make any sense of it. And it's really important to be ready. Then after that, honestly, it's a pathway. And there are many pathways, not one. There are many vendors. There are many opportunities. There are many problems that can be solved. And really what you've got to do the industry at one level and you as an individual grower has got to work out which pathway works for you. And there ain't one, hate to tell you, wish there was, it would be so much simpler. And so there are many, many different pathways. And one of the questions you must ask yourself is, what is your risk appetite? All right? So this is a very standard innovation adoption risk appetite thing. So you've got innovators right on the far left through to the laggards. And see the single line? That's market penetration, right? So what did we say at the beginning? We said we're about 3%. We are way down here on the innovator early adopter scale on AI. We got a very, very long way to go. We will get there to the right-hand side. I think the question is when and how purposefully do we drive it as an industry to get the best possible outcome? And that's, I think, in our control, is how we use the technology. So that requires strategy, either at a firm level, at your own farm level, or at an industry level. And both of these are very important. So I want to use a case of yield prediction as a case in point of explaining how these different pathways could work. And this is just a case study, right? Like you could do this in any kind of technology problem you're solving. So the first thing that we're trying to solve is yield estimate, getting a really clear yield estimate. This is current practice, very good practice. You do human counts, maybe 3 times a year, depends on the business, sometimes more, depends on the value of the crop. You do an estimation model that comes from a university, that we plug it in, and then we get a yield estimate, right? That's basically how it's done now. And it's done to varying degrees of success. The biggest problem is not the model, it's the human count part. People don't do human counts very well, actually. And so that's the thing. So there's 2 different pathways of how you can get there, all right? And this is what's happening right now in the market with different vendors who are choosing different ways to solve this problem. Pathway 1, and full disclosure, is the pathway as CEO I chose, and is to use AI to replicate the traditional model. Actually, don't do human counts. Take historical data, including yields on every single block, take the weather, take satellite imaging, all of that, and actually run AI models. And what I showed you was an example of that. And then pathway 2 is replace the humans counting and do that better. Teach a computer how to recognise, bunches and berries and count them, right? And then put it into the traditional model and then get a yield estimate. And you can compare both of these. But honestly, the truth is they're coming together. Both pathways, doesn't matter which one you do, we're going to end up at the same one. There is a reason Yamaha acquired the yield and a robotics company. Their business strategy is when we can collect the data of what we see and what we do, as well as the genetics and the weather and everything else, historical data, you put it together and it'll come together in both. But you could have that same story with every other single company. When I speak with Kai, he says that's what we're doing. We're agnostic about which platform, which tractor we use. We're going to collect data. We're going to start with pathway 2, but we're going to pull it together and ultimately we're going to combine both and we're going to do both at the same time. Yes? So we've effectively got a different pathway to do the same thing. Which one should I choose? Okay, well, it's actually a business decision. First path, the reason I chose one is we were selling to large corporates. They had data. Treasury has data. It has a lot globally, 30,000 acres globally, and a lot of data. And because it's a big business, it collects it because it has to run itself. Got masses of data. Tick, we only work with large corporates, or large, not necessarily corporate, large family farms, bigger organisations. When you are fully integrated as a business, you really need to, you have use cases that, for example, if I know 18 months in advance, because when you use this version, you can do it very early because you don't have to wait to count. So our first model is 18 months in advance, right? And then, so if I'm trying to plan a winery and match it to where the market is going and work out my blends in advance, I want to know 18 months in advance. If I'm running contracting and I'm buying half of my grapes, I want to know 12 months in advance before the market knows, before that first fruit set count is done, because if it's going to be a light or heavy, I'm going to adjust my contracting strategy. I'm in early. If I want to, do winter pruning, if I'm a vineyard management operator, I might want to get winter pruning in, because we all know the earlier the intervention, the lower the cost. Get winter pruning right. It's going to be heavy, quick, let's cut hard. But if I'm a smaller grower and I've got 100 acres, and remember the median side in Napa is 70 acres, right, of the average side of a vineyard in the Napa Valley, I might very well choose pathway 2. Because I don't have those other problems. I've got a contract with a winery. They're going to take, 4,000 tonnes an acre, not 4,000, do you know what I mean? Frozen brain. I've got a fixed amount of tonnes per acre, and I'm going to be able to sell it, and my vineyard management operator is going to make sure I deliver to that number. So what do I care? Early, I might be much better off going with the pathway 2 because I'm getting visual imaging. It's going to help me manage, get a better quality, get my bricks right, all of that sort of stuff. So it's not like there's one right answer. It all comes down to what is your business and what are you trying to solve. So to get this right, know your own risk appetite, get your data sorted, work out what it actually means and what the pros and cons of the different solutions are. Don't believe anyone who tells you there's only one. And then actually work out the right pathway to do it. Does that make sense? Just very quickly on this, because I do want to leave time for questions, is that the problem that we actually have is that if you think about it as a 3-legged stool, if we're going to get to fully automated systems, we've got the genetics data, we've got a lot of yield data, all of that exists, we've got the environmental data. What we really don't have is the crop management practice data, because people don't systematically record it. And the closest we get to it actually is probably in software like AgCode, where people are linking it to payroll. So there's much more consistency because they have to. So you've got a lot of data in there that's the proxy for this. But ultimately, when you have autonomous vehicles that are recording what they're doing and what they're seeing at the same time, we're going to get that third leg. So it doesn't mean don't do anything till we get the third leg, because if you wait for that, you're kind of not in a good place. You want to get everything else sorted. So when that third leg comes, not only are you dealing with the labour cost problem of automation, but you've got all your ducks in a row in terms of the data so that you're ready to really get that extra value of using analytics to help guide your business and your growing practice. Does that make sense? Okay, so look, that's just an example of that. I'm going to go through a little bit faster now. I just wanted, as an example of why this really matters, so remember this example from the yield, we're going on pathway 1, and this is showing you the accuracy by these different dates there at the bottom, by different, granularity. And remembering different users want to use this differently. Like a vineyard, a winery operator wants to know which variety. If you're running a logistics hauling company, you want to know basically in the region because you've got to know how much is coming in, etc. Anyway, different people need to know it at different times in different places. And you can see the accuracy rates here. The bottom one where that little bubble is coming out is what it is at the block level. It's not great. It's like coming up to 70%. Mind you, that's still kind of nearly 20% better than humans do themselves, so it ain't bad. And this is at fruit set. But when we have done a controlled experiment, which we've done over 3 years in Australia, New Zealand and the US, together with Yamaha and with the University of Technology, Sydney, we found that we get a very significant uplift by adding that visual imaging from scanning as they go up and down. And we worked with Green Atlas, actually, that has a very sophisticated LiDAR-based counting system. And we measured it. We compared the two ways. And what we found is that we could we expect to exceed 80% accuracy at block level at fruit set by combining the two, okay? So this is timing. We also do timing. And so you can see there that the actual harvest is the light line and green is the predicted. Again, we can get this very early, get the shape early. And is it perfect? No, like any prediction, it's not perfect, but it's a lot better than humans do, and it takes a lot of pain out of it. And then it goes into dashboards. It was interesting, the example of asking ChatGPT, because basically the way people interpret all of this is not in accuracy rates, it's like looking at the shape. And this is actually showing a prediction, and this is showing it against reference year. And in the portal, you can choose any reference year, because that's one thing in that learning cycle that every single grower does. It's just like 2013, it's just like 2024 or whatever. So basically, once you have your data all in one place, you can actually visualise this very simply, and then you can overlay the predictions and you can compare it at any time so that you can get that analogue year kind of reference. So what are growers doing already? Essentially, I wanted to just give you a couple of examples. This is Kelly from Atlas Vineyard. So they started experimenting in 23, went through a great process, understood what they wanted to focus on, decided they had some ag code data, they'd focus on logistics, said, right, we're going to do AI. Went to a vendor, the whole thing became extraordinarily expensive because the vendor didn't understand how hard it was. This is often to do with weather. They just don't understand the complexity of dealing with so much data when you're dealing with weather. And it just became too expensive. So they kind of hit pause, thought this isn't going to work for us, and then this year have restarted using field robotics, coming at the same problem. So I'm moving from pathway 1 effectively to pathway 2 using machines. So that's in trial now, and we're still waiting for the results. So I asked Kelly, well, what did you learn? Be very, very clear on how you're going to create business value. And you'll see some commonality in these case studies. It's expensive, so make sure you've got strong backing. This is not something you're going to solve in a year. It's got to be understood as a multi-year thing, just like any sort of R&D in our industry. Make sure the data is clean, also pretty well universal. Understand what A is and what it's capable of delivering now, and have champions, people who really, really believe in it. So this is from Kai with Scout. A lot of words. These texts are going to be available to you, and I'm sorry I'm not doing this justice to any of these because of time constraints, but at least it gives you a sense of what's happening out there. So, Kai and Scout are very much on pathway 2. And so working together with Davis are already out there collecting images, leveraging the data that they already have, doing image recognition, and then putting this into a product. They've also, interestingly, got a ChatGPT optimised product just for viticulture, which I know Kai's going to talk about later. So leveraging these different things. Key lessons, a lot of similarity here. Make sure that you're really clear on what you're actually trying to do and what the KPIs are and how you're going to achieve it. Make sure your data's clean. Start small. Make sure that that you've really got it very clearly in place. You've got mutual success plans. It's a cooperation because this is going to be many years, and that you're really in a position where it's crop specific as well. And I think all of these things are really important to understand. So another example, there's just an example of Scout's interface, which I know Kai will talk about later, where it's taking that visual imaging data and putting it into solutions to help with all of those things. So it's going much wider and using visual imaging. So then this is an example from Cara from Foley Farms. They're doing a trial with AI with Yamaha. So in 24, they did a blind trial of validation. So those examples I showed you back with ag code, we did the same thing with their data, showed that we were getting better results. And now in 25, we're doing a real, in-season trial together with them. Benefits, a lot of different things there we've already talked about. One of the things I think Cara calls out, which is important to call out, is people and change management. Cannot tell you how many people have said to me, how on earth could a bunch of data scientists sitting in Sydney know more about this than I do? True, they don't, but they know a lot about data. And it's actually not one or the other, it's actually one informing the other. Remember that feature set, all those little lessons? Well, the yield has like hundreds of these feature sets that feed into the model. You know how it learned it? By talking to you. Every time we talk to you, when it's windy at flowering, this happens. Well, what happens is every time we learn, we codify that into a little feature set so that the models learn faster. And so it really is a collaboration. It's taking knowledge, human knowledge, and working out how to put that into systems. So I'm on to lessons for growers. Set your risk appetite. Understand where you are, Like if you're personally a huge risk taker and an early innovator, but your business is like, nah, we're not going to do that. Let's just wait for everyone else to work it out and we'll do it. You're possibly not in the right place, like you're not aligned between what you want and what your business wants. Just be really clear with your business where they sit. If you are early, you have great privilege because you get to shape the technology and you make sure the technology is going to work for you, and you really are shaping it because the technology company's learning and you're creating with them. It's a co-creation in a way, and you are shaping that. Man, you're so far ahead of the game. You got all your data sorted, you're getting really organised, but you're going to get this stuff up. So you're going to get the things that go wrong. It's kind of going to be frustrating and it's not going to work perfectly the first time. And I can see Mark's laughing because he runs the treasury trials on a whole lot of things. That's what happens when you're an early innovator, right? It's by definition. And that's okay. Just work out where you are and make sure your business is aligned to that and understand what they're getting into. Or maybe you're just going to wait the next season and do it. Be very clear on that. Pick a problem and solve it. Stick with it. Don't swap and change. When you swap and change and it keeps falling over, all you do is teach the people in your business that this doesn't work. Try and do it without operational people in the first instance because that's just going to burn them. Try and do it, like is with doing it sort of like as a R&D and then present the results and then move into a trial with the operational people. They are very busy people and you will make their life hell and they will resent it and hate it if it just is a pain in the neck. I cannot tell you how many trials we did with scanning actually when we were doing that R&D. They had to go and put a GoPro and this was not with Ag Scout, by the way, this was in Australia, and they had to take that disc and they had to get it back to the office and the internet connection wasn't right at an hour at the end of the day because they had to bloody upload the thing, and then, they couldn't get there, it didn't completely work, and it was just frustrating for them. You're just creating work to already very busy people. So think about change management and how you're actually going to involve it, and pick a problem and solve it and use evidence to build trust. Anyone who's doing a prediction must be able to tell you what the accuracy is and honestly. And if they can't tell you that, then honestly, they're not really in the game because you must know how accurate you are to train a model. So use evidence to build trust, work with reliable partners. This is a longer topic I don't really have time to go into. You have great proximity to Silicon Valley. That has great benefits and great disadvantages. Some of the disadvantages, of course, is you get all these vendors coming up to you selling, say, try this, I got this great thing. And, there's so many customers who've churned through this, invested time, actually get quite an interesting result. And the next thing you know, the company's folded. VCs operate on a 5-year window, up and out, just like PE. And so, that has great advantages in giving you early access. It also has risks. So I really think working with reliable partners, because by definition our industry is going to be slower because we only get one go at it a year. You really need to understand that. And protect your data. And we're going to talk about this, Kai, I think this afternoon in the fireside chat. I'm not going to go into this right now. All I want to say to you is one thing in case you're not there. You must own the data of what you give to a company, and you must own the data when it comes out the other end, right? Otherwise, that data of your yield prediction can be used and sold to someone else and potentially used against your interest, right? But the other thing you need to understand is every time a company changes your data one little bit, aggregates it, makes it, cleans it, whatever, it's not the same data, and if you're not careful, you won't own that. And if you don't specify that they can't use the data to train a model, then they're using your data to train a model, even if they're not using your data to run the model. There are steps in an AI process of using data you need to understand to protect your data, and we'll have a discussion about this as well in terms of what does that mean for industry. For industry, right, and I talked to Caleb about this yesterday, I think the industry has an enormous role to shape this that growers can't do individually, and that is insist on open and interoperable systems. There should not be one vendor wins all. There should be many vendors that are working together, and all of that data where it's created out of a vendor system, you should have the right to own it and to actually insist that you can use it in and export it and use it with another vendor. So you need to create the systems, and that's hard for an individual grower to negotiate. So the industry has a role in maybe model contracts of what model contracts for data protection look like. You need to build the skills of the future. We're going to have a different type of skills in the future, and the industry plays an enormous role in advocating for that and making sure that the schools are producing the people that we need. I think there's a really big role for evidence-based performance assessment. You know, benchmark performance, benchmark vendors on how they're going, and actually make that publicly available. That will drive innovation, and that will drive performance, and it'll drive accountability. And finally, create your own industry technology and roadmap. This will help direct all those very enthusiastic startups, is help them understand the problem that you want them to solve and be really clear about what's already there and where the gaps are and where you'd like to work with them. So I think growers have an individual role. I think the industry has a role to help us achieve the promise faster. Thanks very much. So I've left 15 minutes, I hope, for questions. So what I'll do, if it's okay, is I'll take 3, answer, then come back. So that way we'll get through more.
Thank you.
I need a pad.
What a great presentation. Thank you so much. I've been writing about this topic off and on, and I'm just really curious. You know, we're hearing a lot about the Trump administration removing a lot of climate data from public view. Are we anticipating that that's going to affect models? And are there private data companies that are now going to be part of the mix?
Okay, really good question. Is there other questions people want to ask? Yep. I'll just do 3 in a bucket and then come back. Yep. It would help. Sorry, I've got a pen.
Forgive me, I'm not a grower. It's not clear to me why yield estimates are that important. But more to the point, is there any way, Napa Valley's whole economy is based not on quantity but quality. Is there any way in which AI is going to improve quality?
Yep. Thanks.
Got one back. You made a point of stressing that the data is very valuable and not to give that out of hand. Can we discuss the potential upside of letting a third party or a vendor use your data, potentially anonymized, for to spin out models that have maybe a better overview over regional models, or are able to generate regional models, or capture larger potential complexity than farm internal models.
Yep. 3? That's 3. Okay, I'll go. I am not going to comment per se on Trump, although I must admit I'm distressed about the NOAA decisions, because obviously weather is so important in our industry, and to have a diminishing of that capability is really a problem. I think probably, other than the quality question, the other 2 are about data really, and about how do we get access to data. I'll come back to the quality last. On the data question, I'm not saying don't share it. I'm saying share it purposefully. So for example, on the example of, for example, creating regional models, which by definition requires sharing of data. The yield, we did that, but we did it by negotiation with the customer. And we said to them, right, you own the data you give us, you own the forecasts we give at the end, we own the model in the middle, that's our IP, and we won't use your data, including in training a model, without your agreement. And we have customers who agree to that. And some of it, it's because they agree everyone is better off if we share. And some of it, there has even been instances where you're actually creating a bit of a data market where you're saying, okay, we'll pay you something for that. It's a dangerous topic doing that, because you might build in rigidity in sharing data. It's kind of better if you can say, look, it's better if all ships rise, and that you can, it's better for everyone if we share data. Disease model's a classic example, right? Because the disease doesn't occur in one place. it's usually a kind of a regional thing because you've got pathogens sort of going around, it's spores and things like that. So it's better if you can share. There is no doubt it is absolutely better if we all share data, right? Because we will get better quality models. It really is. But this needs to be thought through purposefully and clearly about what you're doing and why. And yes, there is buckets of it, you know. The way Jeff Bezos and Zuckerberg and all these folks are making money is they're vacuuming up your data and they're holding it and using it for their benefit, right? And it's in proprietary sources. You can't get access to it. I personally do not think this is the future for society or for our industry in creating very rich people who control our data, the equivalent of controlling oil. I don't believe in that. This is now in a policy space. I believe in data markets where people own and control their data and there's incentives to share. And it's done purposefully and with understanding of how data is actually used. So let me give you a concrete example. So yes, we're all better off if we share pathogen data. And this industry is pretty good at sharing data. Like you have a long experience of working with Davis, for example, and saying, I'm going to share data, it's pre-farm gate, I don't really mind because we're all better off if we do it, yeah? Okay, now let me give you the counterfactual. So you're sharing your data, you're building a model, and there's no protection of it, and someone's got it, and they're now selling it to the contractor who knows before you what the season's going to be like and goes into a contract that actually reduces your price because they know what the market is going to be, and you've got asymmetry in knowledge. They've got more knowledge than you. And they're using it in the market to actually disadvantage you. That is a problem. That is a problem. And so, you know, you can solve this. It's not really a technology problem, it's a human problem. We have to decide what our business models are. And maybe our business models have to change. Maybe it means that if we're going to share our data so that the supply chain is optimised so we grow exactly the right amount of grapes at the right quality and get it in on time across the whole industry because the whole community is better off, maybe that means the way we contract has to change. And that there's incentive. If you share, you get some sort of uplift or some sort of certainty or some sort of better. I don't know what the answer is. I know that humans will come up with a solution if we know what the problem is, and we've got to be honest about it. But I would hate to see us create an asymmetry in knowledge that sees the grower get done over again. I really would hate to see that. Now, coming back to the quality question. Okay, yield estimation really matters for lots of different reasons. And some of it is actually about quality, right? Most winemakers will tell you they'll want to keep the yield at a certain level because they'll get a higher quality. And so they'll aim for a target so that they see it as a trade-off between quantity and quality, which comes back to how plants grow. And if you get too much foliage and growth, and it affects negatively your quality potentially. That's the standard way that, not even just in vineyards, everywhere. You see this in apples, everywhere. You basically try to get to a target because reaching that target gives you quality. So knowing your estimate, say 18 months in advance, and you want to adjust, your load on the crop, you might go in really hard and you will adjust. So that's a very simple way of why quantitative estimate matters. But also we can do qualitative. We're experimenting with qualitative predictions, which will tell you, and timings do this in a way, it tells you when it's going to be ready to pick. It's inferred in that you're getting the brix levels right and you're saying when they're actually going to reach that. But you can also, when we have a fully automated system, it is fundamentally about quality. Because you'd imagine those tractors going up and down, automated, collecting data, they're seeing disease, they're seeing the bunch, they're estimating the weight, we're seeing what the weather is like, are we going to get dehydration early, whatever it is. All of that data is being used to adjust practice because any vineyard operator vidi, what they're doing is they know what they're trying to achieve. They're actually trying to land a plane. They're trying to bring in the crop on a date, often determined by the vineyard, to a certain quality and a certain tonnage, right? They're trying to land that plane. And at the beginning of the season, it's really wide, and as the season comes in, you're getting closer and closer and closer, and you want to land it on that spot because that's how you're going to make the most money. And you want to do it early Because if you don't do it early, you put an awful, if you're just dropping fruit right at the end, man, you've wasted a whole lot of money. That whole season with inputs that you didn't need to use. So they're integrally linked. And once we have systems that particularly can pick up like visual scanning with disease and, you know, we see damage in the cordage or whatever it is that affects quality, irrigation, massive determinant of quality. Nutrient, you know, what are the leaves looking like, what's the fruit looking like, have we got the actual nutrient levels right? All of this data will help us create better quality and better quantity. The thing is, it's like one of those old puzzles where you've got to pull a piece of string, right? Which string do I pull first? And that's really what we've got to do. We've got to work out the right pathway for ourselves as a business and for ourselves as an industry, because ultimately we'll be able to link this all together with data, but we've got to do it purposefully, and we've got to understand the benefits and risks of sharing data and how we do it in a way that benefits the industry and growers. And that's a good place to stop.